My name is Eric Lofinger. I'm a board member and volunteer with the Altadena Historical Society. And I want to tell you a little bit about us and a bit about our speaker tonight. You're all here to learn a little bit about Jack Parsons. If you're not, you're in the wrong place. But the mission of the Altadena Historical Society is to preserve the past, to honor those who have gone before, and ensure that important events and people are not forgotten. Since 1935, the Society has gathered, preserved, and helped to publicize names and places in an area steeped in history. We want to encourage your interest, your curiosity, and your knowledge of events and people who have shaped this area we love. Our speaker tonight is Justin Chapman, a local guy who made good. He is an author, journalist, travel writer, actor, director, producer, editor, poet, musician, and politician. Justin was also elected to the Altadena Town Council at age 19. There's the politician part right there. He later became a graduate of UC Berkeley and USC. He has written hundreds of articles for print and digital publications and acted in television and movies. He's also a golfer, a snowboarder, a skateboarder, a soccer player, and a father. So he's pretty busy. But he's here tonight for us, and I'll hand it over to him. You're all set.
Maybe sound better than I am. Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it. Thanks everyone for being here. Really appreciate it. It's nice to be back here at the Altadena Community Center. As I mentioned, I was on the town council at age 19, met in this very room.
And you have permission to keep the mic close to your face.
And we met back here 2005 to 2007 when I was on the council, and I think I haven't been back here since then. So it's nice to be back. Thanks to the Altadena Historical Society for inviting me to talk about Jack Parsons. Earlier this year I wrote a pretty lengthy three-part series on Jack Parsons for Pasadena Now. And for this series, I visited the Caltech archives, JPL archives, and Pasadena Museum of History archives. Read several books, a couple of which are here if you want to look at them, and watch documentaries and TV shows on Parsons and other relevant characters. Talked to Frank Malina's son, Roger Malina. Malina was Parsons' partner. JPL historian Eric Conway and others attended a Caltech event in March featuring the author of one of these books. Unearthed old articles from the 30s to the 50s, read oral histories in Caltech, and conducted other research for the story. There's a lot out there about this guy, but still he's not as well known as he probably should be. Jack Parsons was a rocketry pioneer, a self-proclaimed antichrist, a disciple of Aleister Crowley, an explosive expert. He was a self-taught rocket scientist who took some night courses in chemistry at USC, but never received a degree. So he and Frank Malina of Caltech made key breakthroughs in the 30s and 40s that led to the establishment of rocketry as a science and the founding of JPL. Their lives and careers were upended in the 40s and 50s as the FBI investigated them for their unconventional affiliations. Parsons for sex magic and espionage, and Malina for communism, which diminished their achievements and essentially robbed them of credit that they deserved in the rocketry field. So 70 years ago this year, on June 17, 1952, Parsons died in a mysterious, city-shaking explosion in his home lab in a converted coach house behind a mansion on Millionaires Row, South Orange Road in Pasadena. It was officially declared an accident, but some still question whether it was suicide or murder. So as I mentioned, Parsons was an occultist and a disciple of Aleister Crowley, who was a notorious black magician and leader of the Ordo Templi Orientis, the OTO. Crowley, who was called the wickedest man in the world by the British tabloids and called himself the Beast 666, used drugs and taboo sex in his rituals, and became addicted to heroin in his later years before his death in 1947. He called his religion Thelema, Greek word for will. His guiding philosophy was, do what thou wilt. Parsons also had an unpleasant encounter with future Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard, became an informant for the FBI against his rocketry partner Frank Malina, and was investigated for espionage. He was a man of stark contradictions, and he helped change humanity's relationship with space and the stars. Parsons was born Marvel Whiteside Parsons at Good Samaritan Hospital in LA on October 2nd, 1914. After his mother, Ruth, left his father, also named Marvel, for adultery, she changed her son's name to John, nicknamed Jack. Ruth and Jack moved in with her parents on Millionaire's Row in Pasadena in 1916, where Parsons had a well-heeled childhood. He attended Washington Junior, Muir High, University School, and enrolled in Pasadena, then Junior College in 1933, but dropped out after one term. His wealthy grandfather lost his fortune in the Great Depression, and so Parsons got a job at the Hercules Powder Company in LA, where he learned a lot about explosives and used some of their supply for his own projects, along with his lifelong friend, Ed Foreman. Parsons and Foreman were science fiction buffs, and in 1935 connected with Frank Malina, an aeronautics graduate student at Caltech from Texas with similar interests, who worked in a 200-mile-per-hour wind tunnel on campus, and studying under Dr. Theodor von Karman, one of the greatest scientific minds of the era and a brilliant Hungarian aerodynamicist recruited from Germany to head the Guggenheim Aeronautical Laboratory at Caltech, known as GALSIT, in 1930. The edge of space at 62.8 miles, known as the Karman Line, is named after him. They set out to design a high-altitude sounding rocket propelled by either solid or liquid fuel, which was a pipe dream at that time. Rocketry was not yet seen as a legitimate science. But their initial successful test convinced Karman to let them conduct rocket tests on Caltech's campus, even though Parsons and Foreman were not Caltech students. They became known as the GALSIT Rocket Research Group, the forerunner of JPL. Their motto was Ad Astra per Aspera, which means to the stars through hardship. On Halloween 1936, the group conducted what is considered their first official rocket test using methyl alcohol and gaseous oxygen in the Arroyo Seco near Devil's Gate Dam. A photo of Parsons, Foreman, Malina, and others lounging around their rocket apparatus that day is considered the nativity scene of JPL. In 1937, August 1937, the group ruined the green lawn in front of Caltech's chemistry lab by accidentally siphoning too much nitrogen tetroxide, a highly corrosive liquid. Another time, their rocket apparatus inside the GALSIT building leaked a toxic cloud of that liquid and rusted scientific equipment throughout the building. One time, Parsons' ethylene and gaseous oxygen mixture caused two big explosions that rocked the Caltech campus. So they thus became known as the Suicide Squad, and soon had to move all their operations to the Upper Arroyo, on the spot where the massive JPL complex now stands. They leased 6 acres from the city of Pasadena and built a few wood and corrugated sheet metal buildings. Around this time, Parsons and Malina wrote a film proposal about a group of young rocket scientists that they hoped to sell to a movie studio such as MGM to raise money for their rocket project. And the characters very closely resemble members of the Suicide Squad. The plot about right-wing capitalists stealing their rocket research nearly predicted things which later came to pass in real life, such as the Nazis wielding a rocket weapon, Malina's expulsion from the country for his political beliefs, and even Parsons' death by explosion. The manuscript, which includes this drawing, is now housed in the Malina archive at Texas A&M. Hollywood wasn't interested yet, but the U.S. military was. In 1939, World War II was ramping up, and the Nazis were developing the V-1 rocket, and later the dreaded V-2. Because the word rocket was looked down upon, Malina and von Karman persuaded the National Academy of Sciences Committee on Army Air Corps Research to fund the development of jet-assisted takeoffs, JATOs, small rockets to boost and shorten the takeoff time of airplanes on the battlefield. The Suicide Squad became the first rocket research group sanctioned by the U.S. government. They tested their JATOs on a single-engine Irkut monoplane in 1941. The JATOs worked, but they needed a fuel that was less volatile than black powder and would fill the rocket motor casing without pockets of gas, a fuel that was both a solid and a liquid. Parsons came up with a solution: asphalt to bind potassium ammonium perchlorate as solid fuel. Parsons also contributed to the new idea of using red fuming nitric acid as an oxidizer, with benzene or gasoline as liquid fuel. Malina improved on this idea by replacing gasoline and benzene with aniline. Galcic 53, as the name of their fuel invention, was a new paradigm in rocketry. It was used in nuclear missiles, space shuttle boosters, ejector seats, and more in the ensuing decades. George Pendle wrote in his book, Strange Angel, that Parsons' quote, idea of using asphalt instead of black powder as a solid fuel for rockets overturned centuries of previous thought. The results of Parsons' thinking would eventually play a central role in American rocket technology. Although he would not live to see his dream of space travel come true, he was essential to making it a reality. End quote. Of course, perchlorate also results in eventual contamination of the San Gabriel Valley's groundwater supplies for decades to come. The JATOs shortened takeoff time by a third. These innovations enabled the Suicide Squad to file patents and form a private company in March 1942 that produced and sold JATOs to the military for use in the war. They called it the Aerojet Engineering Corporation and set up an office in an old juice cannery on East Colorado Street in Pasadena. JPL, the new name of the growing Galcic Rocket Research Group, was officially established in 1944 with a budget of $650,000. And they were still using jet instead of rocket. Rocket was still around at that time. But with government funding came stricter security precautions. The FBI performed background checks and found out about their various oddball affiliations, including Parsons' occult beliefs and Malina's membership in the Communist Party. Also around this time, Parsons was getting more involved in the occult. In February 1941, he and his first wife, Helen, were initiated into the Agape Lodge, the LA chapter of Aleister Crowley's OTO. In 1942, Parsons moved to 1003 South Orange Grove, an 11-bedroom mansion, where he hosted sex magic rituals as part of Aleister Crowley's occultist philosophy. The mansion was next door to Lily Anheuser-Busch's mansion and became known as both the Parsonage and Grim Gables. And he turned it into a Gnostic mass temple where they hosted OTO gatherings. The mansion was the former home of Arthur Fleming, Caltech benefactor and lumber millionaire, who hosted Caltech luminaries such as Albert Einstein in that house, which he built in 1899 as one of the first craftsman houses in Pasadena. Under Parsons, the house was home to an eclectic and debaucherous group of people, many of whom regularly swapped partners sexually. The house was investigated by the police and FBI many times. By following the OTO's philosophy of do what thou wilt, relationships soon started to fall apart. In June 1941, 27-year-old Parsons began an affair with Helen's half-sister, 17-year-old Betty, who was living with them. Shortly after that, Helen began an affair with Wilfred Smith, who was the head of the Agape Lodge, where they were living. They had a son. And both Helen and Betty suffered sexual abuse from their father and stepfather at Berkeley Mortuary. So Jack and Helen soon divorced. But Jack continued to financially support her and the child that she had. According to author Fraser McDonald, Betty told her daughter Alexis just before she died in 1998 that Parsons initiated their sexual relationship when she was just 13, 2 years before the Parsons got involved in the OTO. Meanwhile, in 1944, General Tire purchased a majority share in Aerojet Engineering Corporation. Foreman and Parsons were urged to sell their shares of the company and pushed out, which they did for $11,000 each, having invested $250 each originally. Von Karman and others also sold their shares, but had they held on like Frank Malina did, their shares would have been worth millions of dollars within a few years. Parsons was essentially pushed out of the company he helped found. It was his unorthodox, out-of-the-box thinking that led to the biggest early rocket science breakthroughs, but the buttoned-down, post-war business environment had no patience for eccentrics or nonconformists, savant or not. By this point, Parsons was regularly drinking homemade absinthe, smoking cannabis, and taking cocaine, amphetamines, morphine, and peyote. Crowley soon banished Smith and Helen from the parsonage and installed Parsons as head of the Agape. Parsons put an ad in the paper for renters that said, only bohemians, artists, musicians, atheists, anarchists, or other exotic types need apply for rooms. Any mundane soul would be ceremoniously ejected, according to a fellow tenant at the time, Alva Rogers, who he later wrote. This ad, needless to say, created quite a flap in Pasadena when it appeared. In 1942, Parsons met science fiction author, U.S. Navy officer, and future Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard at the Manana Literary Society, a gathering of science fiction writers. After the war, Hubbard moved into the parsonage. Parsons fell under the man's spell, enamored with his wild tales of adventure around the world. As a member of the Explorers Club, during the war with American intelligence and aboard submarines, and other fantastical tales such as lassoing a polar bear on an ice floe near Alaska's Aleutian Islands and being shot by Aboriginal arrows. Parsons taught Hubbard Crowley's Thelema philosophy, and they fenced without mess in the main room of the house. But soon Hubbard and Betty began a blatant affair. Parsons, who preached what could later be termed free love and disavowed jealousy, was jealous. The twin pressures of losing Betty and Aerojet seemed to cause him to have a breakdown. He began practicing black magic, witchcraft, and voodoo. From December 1945 to March 1946, he performed a series of intense magical rituals called Babylon Working in an effort to conjure up an elemental mate using his own blood and semen in order to then birth a moon child. He chanted in the Enochian tongue developed by 16th century alchemist Dr. John Dee and drew pentagrams in the air. He believed he experienced supernatural phenomena, but it was likely Hubbard pulling fast phenomena. However, his future second wife, Marjorie Cameron, soon showed up at the parsonage, his elemental mate. Parsons foolishly entered into a business partnership with Hubbard and Betty called Allied Enterprises, in which they agreed to pool all of their resources for the benefit of all three parties. Parsons invested nearly $21,000 into Allied Enterprises, while Hubbard added less than $1,200, and Betty contributed nothing. Hubbard proposed that he and Betty travel to Miami and buy 3 yachts with the pooled funds, then sail the boats back to Los Angeles and sell them at a marked up price. Somehow, Parsons agreed. They left with his money, and he soon couldn't keep his new Vulcan Powder Corporation going. A telegram from House Crowley read, quote, "Suspect Ron playing confidence trick. Jack Parsons weak fool. Obvious victim prowling swindlers." Indeed, Hubbard had written to the Chief of Naval Personnel asking permission to sail to South America and China. When Crowley told Parsons he was the victim of a con, Parsons flew out to Florida. He got a court to put a temporary injunction and restraining order on Hubbard and Betty, preventing them from leaving the country or selling the boats. The couple sailed out anyway. In a Miami hotel. In a Miami hotel room, Parsons summoned Bartzabal, a powerful demon and the god of Mars. Hubbard's yacht encountered a storm at sea.
Testing.
Just use black magic.
It was Bartzabal. Okay, in a Miami hotel room, Parsons summoned Bartzabal, a powerful demon and the god of Mars. Hubbard's yacht encountered a storm at sea, forcing them back to port. A court dissolved Allied Enterprises and made Hubbard pay Parsons $2,900. Parsons agreed not to press further charges because Betty threatened to press charges of her own for their earlier relationship when she was a minor. Hubbard and Betty got married and then divorced a few years later because she didn't like the Scientology philosophy that he was creating. In 1969, the Church of Scientology released a statement claiming that Hubbard was sent in to handle the situation as a U.S. Navy officer and infiltrate the OTO at 1003 Orange Grove, where he dispersed the very bad black magic group and rescued a girl, Betty. Quote, "Hubbard broke up black magic in America. Hubbard's mission was successful far beyond anyone's expectations." End quote. Meanwhile, Frank Malina, who was never part of Parsons' occultist world, was installed as the second director of JPL at age 31 after a very short stint by von Karman. In 1945, Malina oversaw the development and testing of the Whack Corporal and later the Bumper Whack Corporal, the first high-altitude rockets, even before Sputnik. Malina and the U.S. do not get enough credit for reaching extremely high altitudes first, and thus being the real beginning of the space race. Malina was pushed out of JPL as the post-war Red Scare and Cold War heated up. The FBI began looking into what they considered activist scientists at government-funded institutions like JPL. The third director of JPL, on Malina's recommendation, Dr. Louis Dunn, was an FBI informant against Malina, accusing him of espionage and communist sympathies. Malina moved to Paris and worked for UNICEF in 1947. He was later pushed out of UNICEF due to U.S. pressure. He went on to become an influential kinetic artist, building sculptures that incorporated motion and light and other elements from his engineering career. In 1960, he was a founding member of the International Academy of Astronautics and became president in 1963. In 1968, he founded the journal Leonardo about the intersection of art and science, which still publishes. He wrote 3 memoirs and died in 1981. Malina's son, Roger, told me, quote, Frank Malina was a co-initiator of very different organizations, Aerojet, JPL, UNESCO, IAA, Leonardo, in very different fields of activity, and all of these still function. Many of his Caltech associates, who attended a communist discussion club called Unit 122 in the 1930s, got caught up in the House Un-American Activities Committee hearings in the 40s and 50s, lost their jobs, got arrested, lost friends and family, and had their lives ruined. The same fate did not befall Nazi scientists such as Bernard von Braun, who the United States welcomed with open arms in order to harvest their rocketry knowledge. Parsons himself had been a regular FBI informant since 1942. He even gave the FBI a list of Unit 122 members and told agents that Malina, his old friend and rocketry partner, was, quote, associated with groups of pinks at Caltech. He even said that Malina's loyalty, quote, would be questionable if Malina had to decide between our form of government and that of Russia. But the government saw Parsons as an unreliable witness, which was a moot point after his death anyway. After the war, things went downhill for Parsons as well. And he sold 1003 Orange Grove and moved into the coach house on the property, and all the weirdos moved out. He soon resigned from the OTO, and the parsonage was torn down to make way for condos. Parsons started attending night classes at USC and looked for a job in rocketry, now an established industry, largely due to his efforts. Shortly after that, the FBI investigated his ties to communists and the OTO, and his security clearance was revoked, and he lost his job at North American Aviation. He and Marjorie moved to Manhattan Beach. Unable to work in the rocketry field, Parsons turned to his magic and declared himself the Antichrist. He seemed to be having another breakdown around this time. His security clearance was reinstated in 1949, and he went to work for Hughes Aircraft, as in Howard Hughes, and the FBI soon began investigating him again. Von Karman had connected Parsons with Herbert Rosenfeld of the American Technion Society, which passed scientific information on to the burgeoning state of Israel. Rosenfeld asked Parsons to help develop Israel's rocket program and asked for a cost breakdown for such a program. So in September 1950, Parsons gathered classified reports he had co-authored while at Galset and Aerojet and asked his secretary at Hughes to make the copies. She immediately alerted Hughes executives, and they called the FBI, which opened an espionage investigation. In October 1951, the Assistant U.S. Attorney of Los Angeles declined to prosecute Parsons. But in January 1952, the Industrial Review Employment Board rescinded his security clearance again anyway. He started working for powder companies again and launched his own Parsons Chemical Manufacturing Company in North Hollywood. He and Marjorie moved back to Pasadena into an old coach house behind a mansion at 1071 South Orange Grove, just down the street from his old party mansion. He turned the ground floor laundry room into his personal lab. That's where, on June 17, 1952, Parsons allegedly dropped a tin can containing fulminate of mercury, a highly sensitive explosive used as a detonator, which exploded and killed him. The official cause is accident, but J.H. Arnold, superintendent of Burmite Powder Company of Saugus, where Parsons worked until the Friday before his death, said Parsons was, quote, extremely safety conscious. He worked carefully, had a thorough knowledge of his job, and was scrupulously neat. But his friend and foreman said Parsons sweat a lot and that it was a very hot day that day. The Mexican government had reportedly commissioned Parsons to set up an explosive factory in Mexico. So he and his wife Marjorie had been planning to leave on a trip to San Miguel, Mexico that night or the next day. He was fed up with the U.S. They were taking away his security clearance, and he wrote to Von Karman saying, I want to go to a more liberal country. He was transferring chemicals and explosives into a trailer attached to their Packard outside. He had also recently been making pyrotechnics and special effects for motion pictures and was filling a last-minute order for the Special Effects Corporation before their trip, which is what people believe he was working on when he died. According to newspaper articles the next day, Parsons' lab was, quote, ripped apart and a large section of the city was rocked by shockwaves. One wall of the structure was blown out and the first floor was all but shattered inside. The blast, which occurred at 5:08 p.m. and was heard a mile away, exploded walls outward and tore a hole through floor timbers. Several tenants were upstairs above the lab when the explosion took place. They weren't injured, but they were lifted off the couch by the violent blast, a piano collapsed, and a chandelier crashed to the floor. One of those tenants, Greg Gansey, was the last person to see Parsons before the explosion, telling Parsons, quote, don't blow us up, before heading upstairs. Parsons had responded, don't worry about it. Incredibly, Parsons was still alive and conscious after the explosion, albeit missing a limb and the right side of his face. He was pinned underneath a heavy laundry tub. The other tenants pulled him free and leaned him against the wall. Quote, Parsons' body was literally torn apart by the chemical blast, reported the Pasadena Independent the next day. The explosion blew off his right forearm, tore a gaping hole in his jaw, and shattered the other arm and both legs. He was rushed to Huntington Hospital. Officers said he attempted unsuccessfully to tell them how the explosion occurred, and then died at 5:45 p.m. at the hospital. This 37-year-old's last words were, but I'm not finished yet, according to a report in the JPL archive. So perhaps we can rule out suicide. Others have speculated that Parsons was murdered for any number of reasons. In 1938, then 23-year-old Parsons testified as an explosive expert in the trial of LAPD Captain Earl Kynette, head of police intelligence and a corrupt cop who was convicted of placing a car bomb to blow up one of his enemies, private investigator Harry Raymond. The bomb went off, but Raymond survived. This photo was taken during that trial. He built a replica bomb, and that was very similar to the blast. And his testimony, Parsons' testimony, helped send Kynette to prison for more than a decade. And Kynette was released just a few days before the explosion that killed Parsons. Marjorie believed Howard Hughes was behind Parsons' death, perhaps to prevent industrial or trade secrets from getting out after Parsons' recent unceremonial firing from Hughes aircraft. Or was the military worried about Parsons fleeing the country to Israel or Mexico with everything he knew about rocketry and related weapons? Added to the suspicion, Pasadena police chemist Don Hardin originally said the blast apparently occurred behind Parsons to the right. Later, he said Parsons dropped the tin and stooped in a futile effort to grab it before it struck the floor, and that the blast occurred at ground level. Marjorie later said the explosion came from underneath the floorboards. To pile tragedy on top of tragedy, Parsons' mother, Ruth, age 58, killed herself at 424 Arroyo Terrace by ingesting 45 Nembutal sleeping pills just a few hours after her son died, while her arthritic friend watched helplessly. Police shot and killed her dog when it prevented their access to the scene. The press quickly found out about Parsons' unorthodox beliefs and affiliations, and they ran with the story. Police told the press that Parsons' quote, brilliant mind wandered into mystic fields in an unending search for the perfect way of life. He actually lived two lives. In one, he probed deep into the scientific fields of speed and sound and stratosphere. And in another, he sought the cosmos which man has strived throughout the ages to attain, to weld science and philosophy and religion into a utopian existence. Marjorie scattered Parsons' ashes in the Mojave Desert, where he used to conduct rocket tests. In 1968, at an event at JPL celebrating the 32nd anniversary of the Halloween 1936 test that started it all, Frank Malina, who eventually got his passport back and was allowed to return to the U.S., said, quote, I would like to pay homage to Jack Parsons, who made key contributions that play such an important role in American and European space technology. He has not received as yet his due for his pioneering work. Jack Parsons' life goal was to make it to the stars. He didn't quite see that happen in his short lifetime, but his ideas certainly contributed to humans making it to space. In 1972, the International Astronomical Union named a 40-kilometer wide crater on the moon after Parsons. It's on the dark side of the moon, appropriately enough. He was never accepted by Caltech and later the rocketry community, but his name is up there along with all of the scientific greats, and he would have appreciated that. So for further reading, check out George Pendle's Strange Angel, The Otherworldly Life of rocket scientist John Whiteside Parsons. Fraser McDonald's Escape from Earth, A Secret History of the Space Rocket, which is more about Frank Malina's story, but also includes Parsons' story. And John Carter's Sex and Rockets, The Occult World of Jack Parsons. I understand that John Carter is actually a pseudonym, but the author didn't want to lose his government job for writing this book. And there's also a 2-season TV show on Paramount Plus about Parsons, based on Pendle's book with the same name, Strange Angel. And it's a little fictionalized, but it's also worth checking out. And check out Parsons' own writing. He has an interesting short book called Freedom is a Two-Edged Sword. And I also recently I was interviewed extensively for a KPCC LAist podcast about JPL's origins. And I talk a lot about Frank Malina and Jack Parsons. And that's airing, I believe, November 15th. I think the title is Sex in Space or something like that, but keep an eye out for that as well. Thank you very much for your time, and happy to take any questions. One other thing I'll point out is pick up the New Historical Society newsletter. I wrote an article in here about my time on the Altadena Town Council and the movement at the time to have Altadena secede from the PUSD and form its own school district. So that's an interesting story as well.
There are copies out there, right? Maybe you got that. Any questions?
Question. Did Parsons ever work and get paid by Caltech?
He got paid through Aerojet. He was actually never a Caltech employee or a student, and never an official JPL employee. People call him a co-founder of JPL, but institutionally speaking, he wasn't really connected. It was his partners in the Suicide Squad, Frank Malina and Von Carmen, and a few others who joined the JPL part, and he joined the Aerojet part. Both grew out of this new paradigm of rocket fuel that he developed. Yeah, right. So he was never really accepted by a formal scientific community.
Is Parsons Engineering named after him?
No. I was wondering that too. But
Different Parsons.
different Parsons, yeah.
You know, both in the book and in the TV show Strange Angel, we suggested at the end that it was JPL was actually was a pseudonym for Jack Parsons Lab.
Oh, yeah. Jack Parsons Laboratory, JPL.
Yeah, kind of like that.
I bet he liked that too.
Since times have changed, has anyone ever tried to clear that up? Like, just because of his beliefs and, you know, his hobbies. They are not as usual as knitting, and so has anyone ever tried to clear that up to bring him back and try to give him credit?
Yeah, I mean, there have been friends, associates who have different theories, and we'll probably never know for sure what happened. And that's why I wanted to write the series I did for Pasadena Now, is to look back into that, the old articles, what was said at the time. I went to the Pasadena Police Department, and they're like, no, we don't have any records beyond 10 years ago. So I was like, even famous people like that?
You can be a National Geographic camera operator, and you'll hang out there as well.
Yeah.
Whereabouts would the Aerojet building have been?
It was in Old Pasadena. I saw an address somewhere in the old articles. I don't remember where it was exactly, but I don't even know if that building is still there, but it was previously a juice cannery, sort of industrial building for that. And they moved out east shortly after. Yeah,
One detail for future writings on this subject that you may have missed, I'm sure you don't know it, but Marjorie Cameron, his last wife, went on to become an artist in LA, kind of dealing in sex magic rituals in her subject matter.
Yeah.
And she's having sort of a renaissance now, and her work is being displayed in some of the solo show of hers, like in 2015 or so. And she's currently in a lot of shows in LA, but it's kind of interesting that she left that and then had a whole other life as an artist in LA.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up because she is definitely a sort of underground icon in the art scene for sure. And was probably one of the leading proponents of Jack was murdered theories.
Could you talk about the relationship between Parsons and Theodore von Karman? Von Karman seems to have an unassailable reputation. You know, how did he deal with Parsons? You know, was there, you know, was von Karman in league with him in any way, or?
Certainly not with any of the occult stuff, but Jack, you know, he did know his father most of his life, and so he was always looking for father figures, and von Karman was certainly that. You know, von Karman said he was like, looked at him as like, you know, just a character, but recognized that he was brilliant on his own without credentials. Although later in the 40s, when he was trying to get a job and trying to get his security clearance back, von Karman was like, you got to go get a degree at this point, and wrote letters of recommendation for him for places that he was applying for. So von Karman and Frank Malina were definitely a lot closer and worked together at JPL and on the rockets in the mid-40s, and that was definitely a closer relationship. But von Karman liked people scientists who thought outside of the box and brought new ideas into the fold, and he recognized that Jack Parsons did that.
Was von Karman tainted by the Red Scare?
He was a little bit, because back in Hungary, he was an appointed official, I believe, in higher education in the Communist Party of that time. So during the 40s, when they were investigating everybody, they certainly questioned him about his affiliation and allegiance back then. And he also had an assistant at one point who was giving information to, I believe, the same handler that the Rosenbergs did. So he got questions about that as well. Nothing was pinned on him. He certainly survived it professionally, but he was certainly, everyone was suspect, I imagine, and he was certainly suspect at one point as well. Oh, last one. Very well.
Did you run into any information about like where he got funding before he started making money out of his endeavors? Like, it seems like he sort of was just like, he wasn't really making money at first, I'm sure, and he was using a lot of expensive equipment, probably.
Yeah, early on, he and his friend Ed Foreman used his grandfather's money to build rockets. Then when he lost his fortune, he got a job at a powder company that they both did. And then Caltech had very limited funding. It wasn't directly from the school. It was from a student who wanted to contribute. And there, he and Frank Malina and Ed Foreman are driving around Los Angeles trying to find spare parts and put these DIY rockets together. And then in early 40s, late 30s, early 40s, the Army Air Corps started funding them. A little bit at first, $1,000, then $10,000, then $100,000. And then once they built the JATOs, the jet-assisted takeoff little short rockets to boost airplanes during the war, that's when they founded the private company, and then they started making tens of thousands of dollars after that. Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming out.